Thank you very much, Fernando and Paulus, for a very sophisticated peace theory and practice. The Martyr's Mirror gives us a reflection on Christian suffering, and I think this conference is an opportunity for us to hold up a mirror and write about our collective peace building. What have Mennonites learned about peace building over the last 500 years, and it is almost 500 years? We have some shining contributions and stories to tell. We also have some significant flaws. In the field of peace building, we teach the value of self-reflection, and Reina is one of the prime authors in the field of peace building about how do peace builders of any religion or any faith do reflection so that we understand what works well and what is challenging, what didn't work, and what can we learn from our failures. So I think as Mennonites, we need to look in the mirror, both to pat ourselves on the back for our peace-building contributions, but also to look at how we might improve our peace building in the future. So over the last year, I have worked on 8 art pieces to reflect on 8 themes related to Mennonite peace building. Each of these art pieces is hanging in the dining hall. And I chose to use art because at EMU we teach about using arts-based pedagogies for reflection and integrating the arts into our teaching. And really a lot of the pieces came first as art and then as words. So I used Mennonite art forms on plain birch panels, which I'll explain a little bit more as I go along. The art pieces both examine and juxtapose the gifts, challenges, and blind spots for integrating an Anabaptist theology of love of enemies. Several of the pieces challenge Mennonites to listen more closely, to remember that Anabaptism was born on the margins of the church, and today we must continue to listen to the voices on the margins. So the first piece is called A Tribe Called Mennonite. When I arrived in Afghanistan in 2010, a tribal elder welcomed me saying, "Ah, you are from the tribe called Mennonite." And this was a compliment. I realized I'm not coming as an individual without a history or as part of the American military complex. I arrived on the coattails of Mennonite humanitarians who had befriended and supported Muslim peace building in the region over many decades. I had a trusted identity that was separate from the U.S. military, and that separation and distinction actually increased my safety and my ability to work and network with Afghan peacebuilding experts. When I worked for MCC Ontario as Native Concerns Coordinator, I just got the slow notice, a First Nations elder taught me not to run away from my heritage, but rather to look for how it can teach me, how it enriches me, the gifts that it gives me. I think many Christians do sort of run away to First Nations elders looking for some redemption from some parts of Christian life. But this Native elder was saying, you need to stay Mennonite. You can learn from Native elders. But go back to your own religion and learn from it. But also he stressed that culture and ideology are not static. They grow, they learn, they adapt. And First Nations elders know this about their own religion, the Red Way. And certainly Mennonites, we have to learn and adapt as we go along. The wisdom is to capture, I think, the advice that we give children to have both roots and wings. So we're kind of examining our roots, but I think we're also exploring our wings with this conference. Amongst our own tribe, the tribe called Mennonite, we've had not only 500 years of peace building, but also 500 years of internal conflict and division. We have a history of being really ugly and socially persecuting each other. We are really talented at giving icy stares, cold shoulders, and the well-known social torture technique known as the silent treatment. We are quite gifted at loving people in far-off corners of the world, but we are not so gifted at loving our neighbors within the church in the midst of conflict or theological disagreement. It's almost as if Mennonites are addicted to conflict, that our history is made up of the stories about how we split. So this artwork is made out of buttons and hooks and fasteners for a reason. It was one of the first conflicts in the Anabaptist history, whether we would wear buttons or use buttons to fasten our clothing, which were a sign really of the state, and the military used buttons, or whether we would stick with hook and fasteners to fasten our clothing. So isn't it ironic that the first conflict dividing the church is actually on what was used to hold together our clothes? The first arts piece, though, also looks at the tribe called Mennonite in the roots at, despite the vast theological difference in versions of the Mennonite tribe, there is still these roots that hold us together, and the roots are actually more in the practice of community, of service, of music, and of peace. The landscape in the portrait is laid out to the paradoxical words that we sing in the hymn, "Blessed be the tie that binds," because so many of our hymns, and actually the core of our peace building, is about relationships and improving relationships. The integrity of global Mennonite peace building rests on our ability to work through internal conflicts and develop a coherent ideology that allows for greater theological diversity in our church. And we must model pragmatic peace building in addition to making peace with and for other people. I'm speaking too fast. The second piece of art is a reflection really on the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, where I live. We think today that conservative and progressive Mennonites hold very different theologies, but again, the practices of creation care and living simply are actually very similar. And this occurred to me one day as I was driving in the Shenandoah Valley in my Toyota Prius with my family, and we passed a horse and buggy, and I thought, now I see them and know they're Mennonite, but do they see me and know that I'm Mennonite? At first sight, the modes of transportation seemed very different. And we were actually on our way to celebrate Hanukkah because my husband's Jewish and we were raising our children to be both Jewish and Mennonite. So there's pretty big theological differences, I recognize. But still, if you pass a church, of an old Mennonite church on a Sunday morning, you'll see a line of horse and buggies. And many Mennonite churches in the progressive order, and I was at Fresno Mennonite Church when I pulled in, and there were 20 Prius cars lined up. And I see John Rudy there. John Rudy is my colleague, and we visited the U.S. Army War College just a few weeks ago, and we both pulled in with our Prius cars, and the guard asked, "Who are you?" Well, we're from the peace building field, and they're like, "Do all peace builders drive Prius cars?" But the inspiration is actually the same. The Prius is fuel efficient. It's thinking about the global community in which we live and how do we live responsibly with that. Also on on Shenandoah Valley roads, you will see many bicyclists, and it's usually the old Mennonites and the progressive Mennonites who are biking to work. And if you go to the farmer's market, it is the old Mennonites and the progressive Mennonites who are selling vegetables from their garden. So the similarity actually in expression is still there. The third portrait is of Mennonites and Muslims, which we've heard about a bit already. This portrait contains images and texts that speak to this 500-year really relationship between Mennonites and Muslims. It's on a background of Mennonite quilt squares juxtaposed with Islamic tiles, which, as you can see, even artistically, some of our art forms are similar. Michael Sattler was one of the earliest Anabaptists to be martyred. The state martyred Sattler in large part because of his refusal to fight Muslims. At the top there's a quote from Sattler at his trial: "If the Turks should come, we ought not to resist them, for it is written, 'Thou shalt not kill.'" And this was heretical, and he was put to death for saying these words. Mennonites continue to have a unique relationship with Muslims. At EMU, Muslims come to study peacemaking and tell us they leave as better Muslims. In fact, we have more Muslim women wearing head coverings at EMU than we have Mennonite women wearing head coverings. 3 of my closest colleagues have been martyred because of their work for peace in Muslim countries. Glenn Lapp, who's on the left here, was my closest colleague in Afghanistan. He was an MCC volunteer, killed along with 9 other humanitarians, delivering healthcare to remote villages. Javed Akhtar, on the right, was killed in Pakistan by a militant group opposing the peace-building work he did with Just Peace Initiatives, a program that was started by EMU, that's Eastern Mennonite University graduate Ali Gohar. And Ali went back to Pakistan after getting his degree and started Just Peace Initiatives. Tom Fox at the bottom is a member of Christian peacemaker teams in Iraq. He was also my student at EMU, and he was killed because of his human rights advocacy on behalf of Muslim men in Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad. A top Muslim cleric in London, as well as Muslim Brotherhood leaders in Iran, called for those holding the Christian peacemaker team hostage to release these good men. And I think actually this act by a Muslim cleric who some said was the top al-Qaeda spiritual leader in Europe, calling for their release, calling the hostage takers to release these good men, is actually a very profound moment in the history of, let's call it, the global war on terror. And it really needs some young student to go and research this more consistently, because there have been some remarkable outreach from Muslim leaders specifically to Mennonites and Christian peacemaker team members. In an increasingly Islamophobic world, Mennonite voices are on the margins when it comes to Muslims, but we have a unique and important voice in reaching out to Muslims and working together for peace. The fourth portrait is out of order for my slides. Okay, Black, Red, and Yellow Lives Matter. I grew up in Bluffton Mennonite Church singing, Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in God's sight. And yet, I rarely saw anyone who was not white at the pulpit of my church. Pennsylvania Dutch Mennonites use the art form called fracture to decorate important documents or to write out sacred passages from the Bible and texts and place them on their wall. So I wanted to do this from my own context because I think fracture's decorative style highlights the importance of reminding us that all Black lives matter, and red lives matter, and yellow lives matter. Mennonites cannot be a prophetic voice for peace if all of our institutions are headed by white, Swiss, German, and Russian Mennonites. We have to break out of the ethnic hold on Mennonite institutions to do more to affirm the leadership of Anabaptists with African, Asian, Latin American, and indigenous origin. Tribes often share a genetic code, but more importantly, they share an ideology and a purpose. Ironically, there is a genetic disorder within Mennonites, and I have Mennonite ancestors all the way back in my family tree, so I have an extra heavy dose of this genetic disorder known as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And it's not a fun disease. It's basically all of my joints and tendons tend to fall apart. My sister's had many surgeries. Both of my children are constantly wearing braces and taping their limbs together. They rip and tear. And the irony is this genetic disorder that Mennonites have is the perfect symbol for how our church continues to fall apart. The Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe wrote a book called Things Fall Apart. And I think, again, Black lives matter, red lives matter, yellow lives matter, because the future of the church really requires genetic diversity and coming in to the Swiss Mennonite Russian tangled knot that we have and helping us solve our internal conflicts. I think white Mennonites also need to spend more of their time taking responsibility for whiteness by challenging white power structures and working with poor white communities like my family neighbors who fly the Confederate flag and have Trump signs in their front yard. And in all ways, they are the Trump Taliban. They look and act just like I saw the Taliban act in Afghanistan. The next portrait is of Mennonites and sexual violence. This martyr's mirror image of Dirk Willems rescuing the man who was chasing him because he's an Anabaptist is a common symbol of Mennonite love of enemies. In this version, Dirk symbolizes the Mennonite church, reaching out to save a perpetrator of sexual violence. As we see, the churches so often reach out to save the dignity and to save the humanity of the perpetrator and their professional positions, while really trying to silence the women who are screaming in the water, yelling, "Please reach out and help me too." Advocates against sexual violence witness the church's one-sided approach to protect the dignity and life of the perpetrator. Victims of sexual violence are on the margins. How is it that the church most concerned with state violence has fallen significantly behind the state's efforts to prevent and respond to sexual violence? I work at the United Nations, at the World Bank. They are all fully organized to prevent sexual violence, and they have many, many programs, far more than our Mennonite institutions do. Mennonites are called to love both victims and offenders, but actually find it very hard to do both at the same time. Our peace theology hasn't really caught up with the dilemma of how to keep victims in the center of our peace building when the victims challenge the church's integrity. In sexualized violence, the church rushes to love the enemy, the perpetrator. We have to listen to these voices to have a Mennonite peace building with integrity that's able to prevent sexualized violence within the church. The next portrait is of the Pink Meadow movement. Early Anabaptists who did not conform to official church doctrine were convicted of heresy. Authorities ordered guards to construct an iron torture device that would literally screw the tongue of the condemned, making it impossible for Anabaptists to speak at their executions to those who came to watch their deaths. Today's Mennonite institutions also silence Anabaptists who do not conform. Pink Meadow is an organization of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex people, and those who stand in solidarity with them. Pink Meadow representatives have been consistently excluded from official church processes, and they feel silenced, as my friend and student Christian Parks here in the lower right-hand corner. In the artwork, Jennifer Yoder of Pink Meadow is juxtaposed in the etching from the martyr's mirror plate, illustrating the application of a tongue screw first heated in the fire. In the upper left-hand corner, a cloud of Pink Meadow witnesses hold up their hands in solidarity. I think Jennifer Yoder and Christian Parks, the two Anabaptist young people, actually are the perfect Anabaptist witnesses today. They have devoted their life to peace and justice. They speak out on behalf of a Jesus-centered peace building, and they are continuing to witness to the church about their silencing, even in the midst of the humiliation that they feel. The next portrait is of my own work of working on the margins of peace building by trying to plant peace in the Pentagon. When I went to Iraq with Mennonite Central Committee in 2005, Iraqi peace builders told me directly, "It's great that you Mennonites teach and support people in community-based peace building, but what we really need you to do is to teach your government and military about peace building." And it was like the fourth time that people in other countries had looked me directly in the eyes and said, "What are you doing about your government?" They said, peace building doesn't land in a helicopter, peace building grows from the ground up. And it's that metaphor of planting seeds of peace that we have to think about. And I used the Mennonite art form known as Schirch or paper cutting to try to improvise a paper cutting of what would planting seeds in the Pentagon look like. Surely I know that most of the seeds will not grow, and it's very messy business, and I'm often discouraged. But when I started attending and speaking at military conferences and training military units in peace building, some Mennonites questioned whether this was a Mennonite approach to peace building. For me, I see it as a natural conclusion of the journey of Mennonite peace building and loving those with whom we disagree. So I think for some peace builders, they think, our enemies are the Palestinians or Iranians, and we are loving them. But neither Palestinians nor Iranians are our enemies. They are the enemies of the state. And so when I ask, how do we love the state and how do we love the military, it's almost as if I'm saying something heretical. And just a couple months ago, I was saying, we love the Palestinians and we reach out to Palestinians. How are we reaching out and how are we loving Israelis? And a Mennonite close colleague said, well, we can't do that. Why not? In peace building, we don't even use the word enemy. And I think in Mennonite peace building, we need to get this word enemy out of our language, actually, because in peace building in the field, we talk about stakeholders, those who have a stake in the conflict. And everybody, especially those who are charged with waging war or containing violence, need to be engaged. So we will not build peace in the world until we engage the military and the police. And finally, the last portrait is of the two-hand approach to peace building. Mennonite theologians have often advocated a two-kingdom theology where Mennonites live in God's kingdom while the state rules the secular kingdom. But two-kingdom theology does not give us an adequate platform for understanding the challenges of peace building in the real world. We're not separated anymore, we're engaging with the powers. Mennonite peace building instead requires a two-hand theology where we both reach out to love our enemies, to build relationships, to engage with people that we disagree with, while we have one hand up in resistance to injustice and to push and advocate for peace and justice. And so when I'm at the Pentagon, it's both. I see the humanity of the people I'm working with, and I'm pushing for justice and for change. I think two-hand theology provides Mennonite peace building with a biblical focus on both love of enemies and victims through a handout in relationship while acknowledging the structures of power and privilege that must be pushed to bring us along. In two-hand theology, we must find ways of loving the Taliban and the U.S. military. We must find ways to demand that Black Lives Matter and to find a way to love the police, to love Palestinians and Israelis, to love victims of sexual abuse and perpetrators. So in summary, we need to model peace building within Mennonite church relationships, increase diversity of leadership in Mennonite institutions, listen and affirm voices on the margins of both church and society, challenge white power structures, care for all victims, especially victims of sexual violence, and use this two-handed approach. Thank you.
Thanks to all three of you for those provocative words and inspiration for the days ahead. We all know, and I know, that all three of these speakers have much more than 15 minutes to say. And you will have many opportunities over the next few days to draw them out further on the sampling they gave you of their ideas and their wisdom. We intentionally wanted to fill you up in this first plenary session, fill you with ideas and thoughts and inspiration that would guide us in the days ahead. Several years ago, I had the privilege to participate in the ordination of the first Mennonite woman in the Evangelical Mennonite Church of Congo in Mujimai, Democratic Republic of Congo. That was a 6-hour service. So I don't feel badly about a 2-hour opening plenary. There'll be many opportunities, as I've said, over the next few days to talk more about these ideas. Right now, I'd like to introduce some important people. First of all, my colleagues, faculty, staff, and administration here at Conrad Grebel University College have been very generous, supportive, and helpful throughout the planning. So I thank them collectively here, and I hope you have that opportunity to do so while you're here. We have a set of volunteers in blue GMP t-shirts. Can you stand up, blue-shirted friends? We have a larger group that you'll see throughout the conference. They are mainly graduate students from our Master of Peace and Conflict Studies and Master of Theological Studies programs. They'll be helping you find your way throughout the building. They will be taking notes in all the concurrent sessions and assisting in those classrooms on Friday and Saturday. And they are led by our staff person, Kelly Brown. Stand up, Kelly. In the audience are assisting with interpretation. Today we thank Paul Stuckey and Sarah Koopman in the back. Thank you for this support. The interpretation services are being coordinated by Rachel Reist. Rachel, with equipment support from Hans Peters from Mennonite Church Eastern Canada. And so you can find Rachel. Rachel, wave your hand if you have interpretation questions. Rebecca Gibbons is the overall events and conference coordinator here at Conrad Grebel. I don't think Rebecca is in the room right now. She oversees the registration desk and the logistical arrangements for this event. That's probably why she's not here right now. I'd just like to take a moment just to note the very significant female leadership in making this event happen. Just have to say. And most important, all of you will have communicated at some point with Mary Lou Clausen, the Global Mennonite Peace Building Conference Coordinator. She has done a stellar job of bringing all this together. Mary Lou also teaches in the Peace and Conflict Studies program here, and so I'd like to invite her up for some important announcements.
Well, thank you all. It's been a great pleasure to work at this conference and work with Marlene and Raina, who are amazing women to work with. They both see the big picture and attend to details, and so it's been a gift for me and a learning experience for me as well. So I say welcome, or as I said in northern Nigeria about a year ago, just before we were leaving, in Hausa language they say Sanu da zuwa. Sanu da zuwa. So as I've had the privilege and joy of interacting with you over the information highway, I'm glad to see that you've made your way here through the air and by land travel safely. And now we can get to see each other face to face, and I can put faces to the names that I've been working with all this time. When you registered, you received a blue bag with a program and a folder of additional materials. Please put your name on your program and keep these with you to review the information therein whenever you need it. The program outlines our concurrent sessions and some other important activities that are available for interaction during this conference. The place here at Grebel is not difficult to get to know. At first, of course, it can be confusing, but it's not difficult. But there is also a vast campus around us, and so the maps in your materials also will help guide you to find certain locations that you need. And if you need particular direction help, please feel free to see the folks at our registration desk. In your name tag, you were told when you were registered, but as a reminder, are all your meal tickets. And if there is some confusion between what you thought you'd ordered and what is in your name tag, please come and see me. And for those of you who did not buy meals, there may be some tickets available, very few in some cases, although I think we have a few for tomorrow, Friday lunch and Saturday lunch. So you can check at that table to see if there's any available for purchase, if you did not order any in advance. The registration desk has been staffed by many different people, but our main person that will be there over the duration of the conference is Neve Cancella. And there's others there. There's also a message board available. And I've overheard somebody saying, well, we want to get together for a noon-hour conversation about X. I suggest that if you have such ideas, that would be a place you could put a notice up. And if we all keep checking, we may find a group of people with like ideas to connect.